So far you learned in this course about user controls. User controls are the UI components that you build as part of your WPF application. Besides user controls, WPF supports also so-called custom controls. While a user control has a hard-coded user interface in its XAML file, a custom control is lookless. Lookless means that the user interface for a custom control is defined in a control template. You can change that control template by setting the template property of the custom control. This means, compared to a user control, a custom control allows you to change the user interface with a control template. You don't have to own the code of the custom control to be able to change the user interface. All WPF controls, like for example button, text box or list view, are implemented as custom controls. This allows you as a developer to change their look. If you plan to build a control library for different applications, you might also create custom controls. Then the users of your library can adjust the look of these controls with control templates. But when you build a WPF application, you usually create user controls. This is also what you did in this course in the customer's application. The customer's view and the product's view are user controls in our application. So, when you build a WPF application, you might not create any custom controls. But you definitely need to know how to change the look of a custom control. And to do that, you need to set the template property. Let's take here this button with a height and a width of 50 pixels as an example. By default, the button looks very much like this. Now let's say that you want to create a button that looks like a circle. To do that, you can set the button's template property with the property element syntax. To this template property, you assign a control template with a target type button. In this control template, you can create the user interface for the button. You can use here any WPF UI element, like a panel, a control, or a shape. A shape is a simple UI element like rectangle or ellipse. In this case, let's create an orange ellipse in the control template. This means now that the button will look like this. As you can see, everything from its original look is gone. You have defined a completely new user interface for the button with the control template. Now, what will happen when you set the button's background property to blue? This has no effect because you don't use the background property in the template. In the template, you hard-coded here the value orange. This means that the button stays orange. In a control template, you can use the template binding markup extension. This is like a data binding, and it allows you in this case to bind the fill property of the ellipse to the background property of the button. This means that with this template binding, the button will be blue, because the control template uses the button's background property. If you create a control template for your WPF application, it is also totally okay to hardcode here a value like the color. In this case, it makes the button orange. When you hardcode values, you just need to be aware that, like here, setting the background property on the button has no effect. So here, let's remove the background property. Now you changed the look of the button. The button fully works like this. When you click it, as usual, the click event is raised. But right now, the button does not give any visual feedback when the user moves, for example, the mouse over the button. To adjust the button visually for different states, you can define triggers in the control template. You can create, for example, a property trigger for the isMouseOver property. Now, let's assume that you want to change the fill property of the ellipse when this trigger is active. To do that, you need to give the ellipse a name with the xName attribute. Then you can create a setter in the trigger that sets the fill property of that ellipse, for example to the value green. This means when you now move the mouse over the button turns green. And when you move the mouse away, it turns orange again. Now, instead of setting this control template locally on a button, you can also set it as part of a style. You can create, for example, an implicit style for buttons, and then you define a setter for the template property. With the property element setter.value, you assign the control template to the setter's value property. Now, important to know is that every custom control has by default such an implicit style that defines the default control template. Or in other words, that defines the default look of the control. This means instead of creating a control template from scratch like we did it in this clip for the button, you can also create a copy of that default template and then you adjust that copy to your needs. This is actually the usual use case. In the next clip, you will learn how to create a control template for the checkbox. I will show you how to use Visual Studio to create a copy of the default control template.